How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yomi Zevachim, Daf 34 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends. Yo, friends. I think it's going to be a tough daf. I think it's going to be a tough daf. I think it's going to be a long daf. I think it's going to be a tough daf. It's going to be a good daf. It's going to be a good daf. It's going to be a good daf. It's going to be hard. The thing is also, I'm tempted to want to get to the Mishnah about halfway daf through Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, which we'll see. If we're just like, if we can't do it, if we're just too exhausted, then maybe we'll just finish at the end of Lamed Daled Amud Beis. But it ends in the middle, and I prefer not to stop in the middle because then it gives us a lot of work to do to begin with tomorrow, and tomorrow's daf is hard too. The next few days are going to be difficult. So we got a lot of work to do. Baruch Hashem. It's avodas hakodesh. It's good work to do. It's the best work to do. So it's givaldig. So okay. So what do we have in store for today's daf? Number one, a tamei person eats tahor kodesh. It's kind of a continuation from the discussion from yesterday about the pasuk of b'chol kodesh lo siga b'chol kodesh lo siga v'la mikdash lo savo ad melos yemei Torah by yoledes by tvul yom. From which Rish Lakish learns about a tahor person who touches, a tamei person who touches kodesh, also a tamei person who eats kodesh. A warning for tamei person who eats kodesh, as we learned about yesterday, and now we're going to talk about, tamei person eating kodesh, also in the context of the zerikah adam, after zerikah adam. Next, we get to a tahor person eats tamei kodesh. So a tahor person, but the kodshim, the kodesh is tamei, and a tahor person eats that kodesh before zerikah adam. What happens? Burning non-prescribed animals on the altar. So be'etzem, the korbanos that could be, the animals that could be offered as korbanos on the mizbeach are be'etzem a cow, a sheep, and a goat. What about deer? What about horses? Right, well, we're going to discuss that. And then we get up to kind of the whole, honestly, kind of like the whole Lamed Daled Amud Beis, and until we get to the Mishnah Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, halfway through the Amud, really talks about different manifestations of Sheerayim and dichui. Sheesh, that's going to be a sugya. We will get there. Anyways, Cheva, that is what we have in store for the mighty daf of Lamed Daled of Masechta Zevachim. All right, friends, we are going to begin on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, 3 lines into the Daf. V'akatmi ba'i lei l'tamisha ochal pesar kodesh lifnei zerikah. All right, we got to brush up on Rish Lakish's shita from yesterday, which is that be'etzem Rish Lakish learns out 2 things from the pasuk by Yoledes, who becomes a Tvulas Yom Aruch, and it says b'chol kodesh lo siga v'la mikdash lo savo. So Rish Lakish learned out 2 things from that voice. Number 1, b'chol kodesh lo siga, that she can't touch kodesh. So that's teaching that tamei people are not allowed to touch kodesh, kodshim, and if they do, they're chayiv makis, according to Rish Lakish. Secondly, the juxtaposition of b'chol kodesh lo siga vela mikdash lo savo, the juxtaposition of kodshim to the Beis HaMikdash means that just like going into the Beis HaMikdash, if a tamei person goes into the Beis HaMikdash, there's a chiyuv karis. So also when the pasuk is talking about b'chol kodesh lo siga, we're talking about something regarding kodshim that you'd be chayiv karis for, i.e., a tamei person who eats kodshim. Therefore, it's a warning for a tamei person who eats kodshim that if they do, they're going to be chayiv karis. Because there's another pasuk that says that a tamei person who eats kodshim is going to be chayiv karis. Now we need the warning for that. So this pasuk serves as the warning because of the juxtaposition of b'chol kodesh lo siga v'la mikdash lo savoy. So that teaches that b'chol kodesh lo siga is talking about achilas kodesh, i.e., it's the warning that if a tamei person eats kodshim, they will be chayiv kares. But now the Gemara says, wait, but that's not enough. We need that pasuk to teach us something else, which is not just that a tamei, not just that a tamei person who eats kodshim is going to be chayiv. Well, the question is, what exactly are they chayiv? Okay, but let's just say that they're not allowed to eat. Right, a tamei person is not allowed to eat kodesh achar zerikah sadam. Oh, sheesh. The achar zerikah sadam. Oh boy. 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 Okay. Sheesh. Oh boy. Okay. Because pashtus is when a tamei person is going to be chayiv for eating kodesh in a similar way to that a tahor, right? Meaning kodshim that a tahor person would be chayav, kodshim that a tahor person would be allowed to eat, a tamei person would be chayav would not be allowed to eat that kodesh. Meaning, when a korban is immediately slaughtered, right? When a korban is slaughtered, so you can't eat it yet. You can only eat it after zerikah sadam. Right? A person can only eat from a korban after zerikah sadam. Before zerikah sadam, then even a tahor person is not allowed to eat it. You have to wait till after the zerikah sadam. So when we say that a tamei person is not allowed to eat kodesh, that means in a scenario where a tahor person would be allowed to eat kodesh, a tamei person is not allowed to eat kodesh, and that is la'achar zerikah sadam. So now we need this pasuk to teach us that actually Rish Lakish is saying not just after zerikah sadam, but even before zerikah sadam. So let's see. So says the Gemara, "Vakatmi boile tamei shachol b'sar kodesh lifnei zerikah." So we needed to teach about somebody who's tamei and eats kodshim even before zerikah sadam, that according to Rish Lakish, they will still be chayav makis. The Itmar was stated tamei shachol b'sar kodesh lifnei zerikah, that a tamei person who ate Bisar kodesh, kodshim meat, but the zerikah sadam has not yet been done for the animal. Rish Lakish says nonetheless he gets makis, even though it's prior to zerikah sadam, and even though this animal is in a state where tahor people are unable to eat it, and yet if a tamei person eats it, says Rish Lakish will be chayiv makis. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees and says, "Eino loka." That no, pre zerikah sadam he doesn't get makis, because since pre zerikah sadam a tahor person is not allowed to eat it, right? Only in a scenario where a tahor person would be allowed to eat it, if a tamei person eats it, they'll be chayiv makis. But pre zerikah sadam a tahor person can't eat it, so neither. Okay, so if a tamei person eats it, they will not be chayiv makis. Rish Lakish damar loka, and how does Rish Lakish know his opinion that even prior to zerikah sadam, a tamei person who eats b'sar kodesh would be chayiv makis? Kodesh leisiga, that when the pasuk says don't touch any kodesh, and we learn that to be referring to eating kodshim, loshna lifnei zerikah v'loshna lachar zerikah. So it doesn't matter if it is before zerikah or after zerikah. It says, "B'chodesh lo siga pashit, don't touch kodshim meat. Loshna lifnei zerikah, loshna lachar zerikah." It doesn't matter if it's before zerikah sadam, after zerikah sadam. No, makes no difference. You'll be chayav makis. Rabbi Yochanan Amar eino loka. Rabbi Yochanan says no, he won't be chayav makis prior to zerikah sadam, because kediktani bardula, as Rabbi Yochanan, we saw the opinion of bardula yesterday that Rabbi Yochanan quoted. Asi tumaso. Then he makes a gzerah of tumaso. What's tumaso? So one pasuk says, I'm reading some psukim now. V'nefesh asher sochal b'sar basar mizevach hashlamim asher Hashem v'tumaso olav. So this is talking about tamei she'achal es hakodesh, and it says v'tumaso olav v'nichso nefesh miyamel. So that's the chiyuv kares by tamei she'achal es hakodesh. Now, another pasuk says kol nogeh b'meis b'nefesh ha'adam asher yomos v'lo yischata es mishkan Hashem timei v'nichso nefesh mi Yisrael. Kimenida lozorak olav tamei yia o tumaso. Well, that is talking about a tamei who goes into Beis Hamikdash and says chayiv kars and says tumaso there as well. So it says by tumaso by a tamei who eats kodesh and by a tamei who goes into Beis Hamikdash. V'chikosav ahu lachar zerikah. And when that pasuk is talking about that pasuk of that pasuk that's talking about a tamei shachal es hakodesh, it's talking about le'achar zerikah, because that is when a person starts. Rashi quotes that the pasuk says, what does the pasuk say? Okay, I'm going to read that Rashi. Asu tumasu. Azor estame. It's the second Rashi on the daf. Shaliocha kodesh ama azor me oncho yava oncho leachar zrika hu v'lo lifnei zrika kidikatoni b'gmar that comes rabba yochyu chayav and olive mishum tuma lifnei zrika zam tamlam kol tahor yochal basav anefesh asher tocha basav v'gomer. Right, that. The pasuk, the words right before this pasuk is talking about tamei shachol is kodesh. The pasuk right before ends with kol tahor yochal basar, that any tahor person will eat meat. So the drasha is that any tahor person will eat meat, and then it says will eat meat, and then it says v'chol and v'nefesh tocha basar mizevach sham asher tumaso alav. So we juxtapose eating meat in the state of tuma to eating meat in the state of Tyra. So only somebody would be allowed, only a tahor person, only in a scenario where a tahor person would be allowed to eat meat, would a tamei person be chayiv for eating that basar, that b'sar kodesh. And therefore, since that pasuk is only talking about la'achar zrikas hadam, so therefore it says Rabbi Yochanan would only be chayiv makis if it is la'achar zrikas hadam. Imke nemakra bakodesh. My bechol kodesh mamina taite. So back to the question on Rish Lakish. Right, the question on Rish Lakish was, wait, but doesn't Rish Lakish need to use this pasuk of bechol kodesh lasiga to teach that you're going to be chayiv makis even before zrikas hadam? So says the Gemara, yes. But if that was all that was to be learned, so imken nemakra bakodesh, my bechol kodesh losiga, shmamina taiti. The bechol kodesh is coming to teach, right, even before zikasam. If it was just to say the achar zikasam, we say bakodesh losiga. But bechol kodesh losiga, it's even lifnei zrikas hadam. So Rish Lakish says that if a tamei person eats b'sar kodesh before zrikas hadam, you're going to be chayiv makas. So Yochanan says you're not chayiv makas. Rish Lakish says you are chayiv makis. Now we move on to the next section of today's daf. A tahor person eats tamei kodesh before zerikah. Ooh, that's fun. So this is talking about where the person eating is tahor, but the kodesh, the kodesh meat is tamei. So gufa, we said earlier, tamei shachal b'sar kodesh lifnei zerikah. So we had said that if the person is tamei and he eats b'sar kodesh, the kodesh meat is tahor, lifnei zerikah, and it's before zerikas hadam. So we said it's a machlokas. Rish Lakish amar loke, Rabbi Yochanan amar eino loke. Machlokas Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish says makis, Rabbi Yochanan says no makis. Right, when a tamei person eats b'sar kodesh before zerikas hadam. Omar Abaye, says Abaye, machlokas betumas haguf. That says Abaye, look, this machlokas between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is when it's a tamei person eating tahor kodesh. Ava betumas basar, but if it's fakert, if it's a tahor person eating tamei kodesh meat, if the person is tahor but the meat is tamei, divrei hakel loke. Says Abaye, in that case, even Rabbi Yochanan would agree, makis. A tahor person eating tamei meat, tamei kodesh, says Abaye, even Rabbi Yochanan would say that there's a chiv makis. The Amar Mai, because we said the abosar, the abos eitzimu levona, tzlavne achila ninu. That in, okay, this is the pasuk from which we learn a tahor person who eats tamei meat. Right, this is the pasuk immediately preceding the pasuk that talks about a tamei person eating tahor meat. the pasuk immediately preceding talks about a tahor person eating tamei meat, and that pasuk says, I'm reading the pasuk, ve'abasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo ye'achel, that any meat that becomes tamei cannot be eaten. Ba'ishisar ve'abasar kol tahor yochal basar, and any meat only tahor people can eat the meat. So when it says at the beginning of the pasuk ve'abasar, it's technically not needed so much because at the end of the pasuk it says ve'abasar kol tahor yochal basar, so you don't technically really need it to say another time ve'abasar. So when it says in the pasuk ve'abasar, l'rabus eitzim levona, it's coming to include even eating wood and frankincense. That's also not allowed. And those things are d'lav b'nei achila ninu. And those things are things that aren't even edible. And yet, you're not allowed to eat them. So, va'afilu achi rabinu kra, and even so they're included. Then kal v'chomer, tamei meat, which is food, but it's just lifnei zerikah sadam, still it's going to be also, right? If eitzim and levona, if wood and frankincense is also to eat, so then, right, when they're kodesh, so then certainly, right, so then, and I guess when they're tamei, since certainly meat just before zerikah sadam is also going to be also to eat, and everybody agrees with that, argues Abaye, and you're going to be chayiv makis for that when the person is tahor but the meat is tamei. Rava says punkt fakert. Rava says punkt fakert. Machlokas betumas aguf, that yes, while we saw that the machlokas between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about makis, no makis, is when the person is tamei and the meat is tahor. Aval betumas basar, if it's fakert, if the person is tahor and the meat is tamei, divrei hakol ein aloka. Says Rava, everybody agrees that there's not going to be makis if it's before zerikah sadam. My time, how come? Kevin de lo karina be vitum also olav v'nichrisa. Well, because since you wouldn't be chayiv karis for that, right? Prior to zerikah sadam, there would not be a chiyuv karis. So lo karina be v'abasar sheyiga b'chol tamei lo ye'achel. So we're also not going to say that you chayiv makis, right? Since you wouldn't be chayiv karis for eating that meat, you also, right before zerikah sadam. So a tahor person who eats tamei meat before zerikah sadam would not be chayiv karis. So also there's not going to be any chiyuv makis, even according to Rish Lakish, argues Rava. But didn't we say that when it says ve'abasar, it's even including wood and frankincense? They can be chayiv for eating that. I assume if the person's tahor but they are tamei, so we're saying that you'd even be chayiv for eating that. So certainly you should be chayiv for eating meat. Sure, it's before zerikah, but at least it's meat. So well, when we say that you're going to be chayiv for eating wood and frankincense, it's not just any wood and frankincense, it's wood and frankincense that has become holy with a klisharis. The nice matirov, that the wood and frankincense that have been holy with the klisharis are the equivalent of meat that sheker v'kol matirov that is post zerikas adam. Wood and frankincense that became holy with the klisharis is at the same state as meat that is post zerikas adam. The Tanan that we learn in the Mishnah, kol sheyesh lo matirim, anything that has matirim, for example, meat has matirim, i.e. zerikas adam, avodas adam. So mishakev matirov, so then you're only going to be chayiv once all the matirim are offered, i.e. after zerikas adam. Kol she'ein lo matirov, mishakidesh b'chli. But if it doesn't have matirim, for example, wood, frankincense, well, there's no matirim, it's not like you have to wait till after zerikas adam for anything. So then, if they became kodesh with a kli, so for example, if you had a klisharis, like a shovel that's a klisharis that you use to move around the wood on the mizbeach, or that the frankincense was put into a klisharis, so those would make those at a state that if you got, that you'd be chayiv for consuming them. And now we are up to the next section, burning non-prescribed animals on the altar. Let's see what this is all about. Itmar was stated, Amaila every behema tamei al gabe mizbeach. So if somebody brings up to the top of the mizbeach the limbs of a behema tamei, who can give an example of a behema tamei? A camel, a horse. Rish Lakish Amar Loke. Rish Lakish says, makis. Yechanan Amar says, Yechanan Eino Loke. Yechanan says, nah, come on, take it easy on the guy, no makis. Rish Lakish Amar Loke. Rish Lakish says, Loke. Tahor in tamei lo, right? The pasuk says, Bakar v'tzon. What was the pasuk say? Okay, Torah in minat bakar minat tzon takrivu. But the pasuk says that korbanos should be from bakar, from tzon, from cattle, from how do you define tzon? Tzon, I think, is an umbrella term for sheep and goats. What would that be? Anyways, cows, sheep, goats, those are the things that you're allowed to sacrifice, not horses and camels. Torah in tamei lo, right? So the pasuk says, look, you're allowed to bring cows, sheep, goats, not horses and camels. V'lava ba michlal esei lokin olav, and says Rish Lakish that Allah ba michlal esei, right? The pasuk doesn't say, the Torah doesn't say anywhere, don't offer horses and camels on the mizbeach. What it does say is do offer cows, sheep, and goats, implying don't offer camels and horses. So an implied negative commandment, don't offer camels and horses, which is, it's not explicit, it's implicit. Rish Lakish says you can get whipped for implicit stuff. Right, so Lava Michal Esei, Lokin Olav says, Rish Lakish, you can get makis for an implied negative commandment. For Rabbi Yechanan Omer Ein, Lokin Olav, Rabbi Yechanan says, no makis for bringing the limbs of a horse or a camel onto the mizbeach. Lav b'michlal esei ein lokin olav, because an implied lav you will not get makis for. Meisav Rabbi Yirmiyah asakasha osa toichelu. When it comes to kashrus, when it comes to kashrus, to kosher animals, I'm going to read the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Komafreses parsa v'shusas shesa prosos malas geir babema osa tochelu." The pasuk says, as we know, by which animals are allowed to be eaten, which are kosher animals, split hooves and choose its cud. So long as it has split hooves and choose its cud, osa tochelu, that you can eat. It doesn't say, and don't eat donkeys. The implication is v'lo behema tamei, and not behema tameis. V'lav b'machal esei, and we say there that in implied lav, right, it says eat animals that have split hooves and chew their cud, implying don't eat pork, don't eat donkeys, don't eat camels and horses. That's implied because they don't have both split hooves and chew their cud. And yet we say v'lav b'machal esei, because there's also another pasuk. There's another pasuk that says ach es ze lo sochelu, and it's because there's another pasuk that says and don't eat these things. The question is, why do I need the pasuk to say don't eat these things? We already said what you can eat, implying what you can't eat. Why do I need a separate pasuk to tell me what you can't eat? Because implied lavs are not full-fledged lavs. They're treated the same way that we treat an essay. In order for it to be treated as a lav, and to be chayiv makis, would have to be explicit. But an implied essay would be treated as an essay, not as a lav. So v'lav b'machal essay. So an implied lav is an implied lav is just treated as a mitzvah's essay. So it's a kasha and Rish Lakish, who had said that lav b'machal essay lokan alav. But we see that no, lav b'machal essay is just a mitzvah's essay. You don't get makis for mitzvah's essays. Ella, so Omar lei, Reb Yankiv le Reb Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa. Says Reb Yaakov to Reb Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Ezra aloch, I will explain to you, be'evrei behema tamei dichui alma loy plige. Look, when it comes to the limbs of a behema tamei, Everyone agrees it's just an essay, right? La b'chlal essay. And when the Torah says, offer cows, sheep, and goats, I know that it's sheep, but I said sheeps anyways, okay? When the Torah says cows, sheep, should I just say sheep? Sure. When the Torah says cows, sheep, and goats, offer, implying don't offer camels, well, that's just an essay, and you're not going to be chayiv makas for that. Kiplige, where the machloikas between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is bechaya. When it comes to chayas, for example, deer. A deer, for example. A deer is a kosher animal, but it's not a cow, a goat, or a sheep. It's not a behema, it's a chaya. So sometimes we say, I think we're about to quote this, that sometimes we say that chaya bichlal behema, that a chaya is included in a behema. So maybe I would think that you would be allowed to bring a chaya. So let's see. This is the statement. Rabbi Yochanan Omar over be'esei. Rabbi Yochanan says that if one brings a chaya, a deer, let's say, onto the mizbeach, you will be violating a mitzvah's essay. Rish Lakish Omar ain't over below klum, and actually Rish Lakish says actually you're not going to be chayiv anything at all. Rabbi Yochanan Omar over be'esei, behema in chaya lo. Rabbi Yochanan says you'll be violating an essay because only cows, sheep, and goats are allowed on the mizbeach, implying nothing else. And if you bring a deer, you'll be violating a mitzvah essay. Rish Lakish over below klum. Rish Lakish says you won't be violating anything at all by bringing a deer onto the mizbeach. Hahula mitzvah, because when the pasuk says cows, sheep, and goats, ideally we want cows, sheep, and goats. But if you offered a deer, give all the Meziv Rava asks a kasha on Rish Lakish. Ilu nemar korban lashem be'ema. No, I'm going to read you some psukim for now. If you're driving, don't fall asleep, all right? Psukim time. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem adam ki yakrav mikem korban lashem min ha'behema. So pasuk, it says at the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra that if a person is going to bring a korban min ha'behema, from behemas, but then it's so behemas could even include chaya. But then it says min ha'bakar u'min ha'tzon. It says no, cows, sheep, and goats. Takrivas korbancham, and then it reiterates, it doubles down. Im ola korbano min ha'bakar, again talking about bakar. Zochatom Yaakaveno Pesach Hamod Yaakov also l'tzon l'fnei Hashem v'im min ha'tzon, and now again it mentions tzon, korbano min ha'ksavim, etc., etc., etc. So we see that min ha'bakar u'min ha'tzon is mentioned once and then reiterated each one individually. So basically it doubled down on bakar and tzon. How come? So again, Meisiv Rava Asakasha on Rish Lakish, Ilu Nemar Korban Lashem Behema. If the pasuk would have only said, if you're going to bring a korban, bring it from behemas, I say Omer Chay B'chlal Behema. I would think, okay, behema even includes chayas. How come? Kein shenemar, like it says, Zosa Behema Shetochelu. These are the behemas that you can eat. Sure, sexovim, seizim. So, ox, kilu cow, sheep, goats. But then it says, ayol v'tzvi. What was an ayol? I looked it up. Ayol is I don't remember anymore. An ayol was a thing. I think it was a type of deer. V'tzvi, another type of deer. Well, what's the name of a deer? Is it like a stag or something? Synonyms for deer. Let's see what for deer. What do we got here? Include cervid, buck, doe, stag. Maybe I was thinking of a stag. I don't know. Whatever it is. Oh, no, a hart. A hart is what I'm thinking of. H-A-R-T, a hart. Growing up, I knew a guy named Hart. Akoponim. So the pasuk says zosa behema shetochelu. These are the behemoths that you can eat. It's talking about behemoths. Also, we got hearts and deers. So if it would only say behemoths, so I could think to include chayas. Talmud Omar bakar vatzon. Therefore, it says no. It says mina bakar umina tzon. Bakar vatzon amarti lach v'lo chaya. No, cows, sheep, and goats, not chayas, not deer and hearts. Yachalo yavi. Maybe kosher. Okay, so maybe you shouldn't bring hearts and deers, but maybe if you did, it's kosher. For example, it's like the Talmud Omerlo Rabo Haveli Chitim. It's like a student, his teacher says to him, or maybe to a student that his teacher says to him, "Bring me wheat." And the student comes back and sure he brought wheat, but he also brought barley. He's not violating what his Rebbe said. His Rebbe said, bring me wheat. He brought him the wheat that he asked for. And not only that, he also brought barley. He added on. Givaldig. Shefa. Vikosher, and that's fine. Talmud Omar, bakar vatzon, amarti lecha v'lochaya. But however, the pasuk doubles down. Not only does it says mina behema, mina bakar, mina tzon, then the next two psukim, the pasuk after that talks about v'im mina bakar korbano. The next pasuk talks about v'im mina tzon korbano. So it doubles down on the requirement for bakar v'tzon. It's saying only bakar v'tzon, not chayas. Lemazadomer, halemazadomer. Rather, what is the parable? The Talmud or the metaphor? The Talmud Shomerlo Rabo al tovili elachitin. Rather, what it's similar to is that if his teacher says, "Don't bring me. All I want is wheat and nothing else," and the student comes back with wheat and barley. He's not adding on to what his Rebbe said. He's contradicting. He's in violation of the instructions. The instructions were only wheat, and he came back with wheat and barley, ufosel, and his posel. So therefore, when the pasuk says that korbanos are mina behema, mina bakar, mina tzon, and then the pasuk doubles down on bakar and tzon, it's saying only bakar and tzons. I don't want hearts. I don't want deers. Tiyuvta. To Rish Lakish Tuvta, which is a kasha on Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish has said, look, ideally you should bring bakar and son, but if you bring a hart or a deer, that's fine. However, we see from here, no, the Rabbanu Shalom only wants cows, sheep, and goats. The Rabbanu Shalom doesn't want harts and deers. Friends, what do you think about my new yarmulke? You like it? I made it. Did I ask you already? I made it over Chol Hamoed. On Chol Hamoed, I made it. I got this thing in my head. I should make a Babble on Talmud yarmulke. Now for the rest of the daf, we are really going to be discussing. I basically just lumped it into one thing. I was trying to think if I should divide it up. It's one of those. It's Sheerayim and dichui. Wow, complicated sugyas. Yeah, complicated sugya to begin with, and then it just kind of expands, and I don't know. I wasn't really sure how it expands in kind of technical ways. I wasn't quite sure how to divide it up. So this is kind of the final section, but it's also like a big section. It's kind of going to take us to the end of the daf. Sheerayim and dichui. I think let's just jump in. I'd say. Okay. Says, okay, so the Mishnah says, all right, so if we actually flip back maybe to the Mishnah, still the first Mishnah of the Perek, so on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, all the way at the top line, it says, so if you have these puzzled people who are mekabel the dam with intention of chutz zmanu, chutz komo, and yesh dam nefesh yachshu akosher v'yikabel, so then if there is dam nefesh, if there is still squirting blood left in the neck, so then get a kosher kohen and let him take over from there. So ba'amine Rish Lakish mi Rabbi Yochanan. So Rish Lakish asks Rabbi Yechanan, Pasul maus sheyaise Sheerayim. So, if you have somebody who's pasul, let's say a zar, let's say you have a zar, a non-kohen, does Kabbalah Sadam, not just Kabbalah Sadam, but also zerikah Sadam. Okay, so you had somebody who is a zar, did Kabbalah Sadam, zerikah Sadam, and there's still some squirting blood left in the neck. So the question is, once the zar does zerikah Sadam, is the squirting blood in the neck still usable? Or not? Kilu, can a kosher kohen now come and do Kabbalah Sadam and zerikah Sadam and salvage the korban? Or do we say, no, it's just Sheerayim, it's just leftovers, and you just have to take it and spill it onto the Yesod HaMizbeach? So, Ba'amine Rish Lakish again, Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan, Pasul, if you have somebody's Pasul, let's say a Zar, and he did Kabbalah Sadam, he did zerikah Sadam, Ma'ushe Yaisa Sheerayim, so the blood remaining in the neck, that theoretically could be collected and a kosher kohen could do zerikah Sadam properly, is that doable, or is the blood considered Sheerayim and it just needs to be collected and poured down the holes in the Yesod HaMizbeach? Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan responds, Ein licha zerikah. Excuse me. I just added words from Dago Sabach and sneezed. Ein licha zerikah osa Sheerayim ela chutz lizmanav chutz limkoma ho limratza lefigulo. That says, Rabbi Yochanan, the only time when you're going to have Sheerayim is chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo. That when you have, so I assume it's talking about even a kosher person, right? That when you have a kosher person who does Kabbalah Sadam with the intention of chutz lizmano, well, or chutz limkomo, so and then does the zerikah Sadam, if there's leftover blood in the neck, it cannot be used. You're just gonna have to spill it down the Yesod HaMizbeach. But the implication being, in this case, so long as there is blood left in the neck, it would be able to be used. So if you have a zar who does Kabbalah Sadam and zerikah Sadam, and there's leftover squirty blood in the neck, so you could just have a kosher kohen come and collect that blood and do zerikah Sadam and salvage the korban. Again, but Mine Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan asks Rabbi Yochanan, Pasul Moshe asks Sheerayim. If you have this pasul person, you have, let's say, a zar, and he does Kabbalah Sadam, zerikah Sadam, and there's leftover blood, can a kosher kohen now come and do Kabbalah Sadam, zerikah Sadam properly and salvage the korban? Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan responds, Ein licha zerikah osa Sheerayim ella. The only scenario where it's going to be Sheerayim and unusable, and you're just going to have to spill it down the Yesod HaMizbeach, is chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo, when you have, I assume, somebody who's kosher doing shchita, meaning somebody who's allowed to do shchita or any of the avodah sadam with intentions of chutz lizmano and chutz limkomo, that is not salvageable holim ratz lefigulo, since it's going to be pigul. Rav Zvid Masniach, Rav Zvid teaches the question in the following way. But Mine Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan, Kos Pasul Moshe Sheerayim. So if you have a kohen who does Kabbalah Sadam into a klisharis, into a cup, and then the cup leaves the azara, so it becomes pasul biyotze. The question is, if there's still squirty blood left in the neck, do you have to spill it on the Yesod HaMizbeach, or can you do Kabbalah Sadam with what's remaining and do zerikah Sadam and salvage it? So kos ma'ushi yaisa Sheerayim. If the cup of dam leaves the azara, is the rest of the blood in the neck now Sheerayim, and you can't use it, you just have to spill it on the mizbeach? Or can you do Kabbalah Sadam and Zerikah Sadam and salvage the korban. Omar Le, to which Rabbi Yechon responds to Rish Lakish, Psul Gufe my Svilach. Well, Rish Lakish, what's your position vis-a-vis, let's say, a Zar who does Kabbalah Sadam and Zerikah Sadam? Pasul Majve Sheerayim. If a pasul person doing Kabbalah Sadam and Zerikah Sadam would create a scenario of Sheerayim, well then Kos Pasul Nami Majve Sheerayim. So right, so if Kos Pasul Nami Majve Sheerayim, and I just look at that Rashi. Rashi says Kos Pasul. I'm just looking at Rashi for a second. Kos Yotza Maushi Aisa Ledam Shebetzav Sheerayim Im Zarko Koyin Kosher. Right. So there's also Zerikah Sadam here. Lazev Lo Yeta Kona the Korban She'achsav Yikabel. Right. So says Rabbi Yechon to Rish Lakish, if a Zar who does Kabbalah Sadam and Zerikah Sadam makes the remaining blood Sheerayim, such that it can't be salvaged, just whatever remaining blood needs to be spilled on the Yisod HaMizbeach and that's it. Well, then the same thing for Kos, right? That if you have a cup of blood and it leaves the Azara and then comes back in and it was then thrown in the Mizbeach, well, if by a Zar or a apostle, it would be Sheerayim, so then by this also would be Sheerayim. Apostle loy majve Sheerayim, but if let's say a Zav or a woman or a slave would do Kabbalah Sadam and Zerikah Sadam and it would not make the remaining blood Sheerayim, rather you'd be able to do Zerikah Sadam on that blood, meaning you'd be able to recollect it properly, right? Kabbalah Sadam, Zerikah Sadam properly, and salvage the korban. Kos Pasul Nami Lo Majve Sheerayim. Well, then the same halacha would be by this cup of blood. Also, if there's still blood left in the neck, a kohen kosher could just do Kabbalah Sadam and Zerikah Sadam and salvage the korban. Rav Yirmiyah Midifti Masni Hochi. Rav Yirmiyah Midifti teaches like this. Ba'mine Abaye me Rabba. Abaye asks Rabba, Kos Moshe Yaisa es Chaveroi dichui o Sheerayim. Okay. Abaye asks Rabba, Shish, if you have a korban, and the korban, right, so what does Rashi say? Kos Moshe Yaisa es Chaveroi dichui o Sheerayim. Kagon Chatas shekibel dama b'shnei koses v'nosan kol matnosav me'echod me'en Chavero Sheerayim u'v'nishbach lisod d'chsiv es kol adam yishbach o dichui hu d'chiyah b'yadayim shlonita menu halakonas v'yishabach la'ama shebazor motzi adam nachal kidron. Wow. Okay. So Abaye asks Rabba, so what, for example, if you have a korban chatas, okay? Wow. Now, a korban chatas, you would do Kabbalah Sadam usually into, I imagine, one klisharis. And then you would take that klisharis to the Mizbeach, and you would stick your finger into the blood, and stick it, and then apply blood on each of the four corners of the Mizbeach. What if the blood of the korban chatas was Kabbalah Sadam'd into two vessels? Okay. But all of the applications of the blood on the corners of the Mizbeach came only from one of the two vessels. The other vessel was completely ignored. Okay, so you have a korban chatas. The Kabbalah Sadam was Kabbalah Sadam'd in two vessels. All of the applications on the Mizbeach were applied from only one of the two vessels. What's the status of the second vessel? Do we say that it's Sheerayim? Now, if it's Sheerayim, you would pour it on the yesod of the Mizbeach. But if it's dichui, if it's pushed off, well, then you wouldn't even spill it on the yesod of the Mizbeach. You would spill it directly into the Amma, which was a stream of water which ran, I believe, underneath the Azara. And basically all the blood, I think, would be essentially like squeegeed into there. And all the blood from the Azara would basically be flowed out into Nachal Kidron, to the Kidron Valley. Now, so that's the Shaila. Abaye asks Rabba, if you have a korban chatas, and the Kabbalah Sadam was Kabbalah Sadam'd into two cups, all of the applications of the blood in the Mizbeach were applied from only one of the cups. What's the status? What do you do with the second cup? Right? Because the halacha is, the pasuk says, by a korban chatas, right? So you have all this blood. Normally, you have all this blood of a korban chatas. You apply the blood on the four corners. You have plenty of leftover blood. You take that blood, you go to the mizbeach, and you pour it on the yesod of the mizbeach. We saw the yesod of the mizbeach the other day. It's the first layer, so to speak, of the mizbeach that kind of surrounds it somewhat, but not entirely. So normally you would apply whatever needs to be applied from the blood onto the corners of the mizbeach. Whatever's left over, you would pour on the yesod of the mizbeach. So the question is, when the Kabbalah Saddam was Kabbalah Saddam into two vessels, and all of the Kabbalah Saddam and all of the applications of the blood were applied from one of the vessels, so now you're going to take that vessel, of course, and you're going to pour it on the yesod of mizbeach. What about the second vessel, which wasn't used at all? Do you pour it on the yesod of mizbeach like you would do with Sheerayim, or is it considered dichui, almost like invalidated, pushed off, irrelevant, and you would just pour it down the drain, basically, the channel of water that would flow through the azara, and you would basically just spill it down the drain, so to speak, and it would go out to Nachal Kidron. I believe anything poured down the yesod also, I think would also go down the amma, but I guess do you just basically spill it down the drain, or do you spill it down the yesod first? So again, Rav Yirmiyah Midifti Masni Achi, Rav Yirmiyah Midifti teaches like this. But Minei Abaye Me Rabba. Abaye asks, Rabba Kos, Ma'ushiyai says Chaveru Dichui or Sheerayim. When you have a korban chatas, and the korban chatas, the Kabbalah Saddam is Kabbalah Saddam into two vessels, and all of the applications of the blood of the chatas came from one of the two vessels. The question is, what now happens to the second vessel? Is it dichui? Is it pushed off, and you would just spill it down the drain, basically, into the amma? Or Sheerayim, or is it considered Sheerayim, which it would be the leftover blood, and vesdomo yishpoch, yesod mizbeach, right? That whatever leftover bloods there is, it would just be like all the other leftover blood that would be spilled on the yesod mizbeach. Omerlei. So Rabbi responds, plugte to Rab Elazar Rab Shimon Rabbanan. It's taka a machlokes between Rab Elazar Rab Shimon and the Rabbanan. The sani that we learn in the Brisa. Lemailu Omer. It says above. Where's above? As we know from Masechta Horius, the Sa'ir Nasi, essentially the korban chatas of a king. It says as damo yishpoch, and its blood will be spilled on the yesod mizbeach. Lamato Omer ve'es kol dama yishpoch. But then, by a regular korban chatas, the everyday man's korban chatas, it says ves kol dama yishpoch, all of its blood should be spilled out on the yesod mizbeach. So minayin lechatos shekibel dama ba'arba kosis. So if you have a korban chatas that the Kabbalah Saddam was Kabbalah Saddam'd in 4 cups, we were talking about now into 2 cups. What if you Kabbalah Saddam'd the blood of the korban chatas into 4 cups? V'nosen matona achas mize, and there's 4 corners of the mizbeach. There's 4 cups of blood. You apply blood to each of the 4 corners from each of the 4 cups, i.e., 1 corner per cup, 1 cup for each corner. Shekula nishpachin lisod. So you will spill out all of them on the yesod mizbeach. Talmud Omer ves kol dama yishpoch. So that would be the scenario where all of the blood is spilled on the yesod of the mizbeach. When an application of blood was applied from each of the 4 cups, so then all 4 cups will be spilled on the yesod of the mizbeach. Now what if all 4 applications of blood came from only one of the cups? Would still all 4 cups be spilled on the yesod mizbeach? Talmud Omer ve'es damo. It's blood, not all of its blood, but it's blood. Haketzad hu nishbach liyesod ve'nishbach na'ama. So what happens is, according to the Tanakama, in such a case, the cup from which all 4 applications came from, that would be spilled on the yesod mizbeach. All the other 3 cups would just be spilled down the drain into the amma. Now says Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Omer minayin lechatos shekibel dama ba'arba kosis. How do we know that if we have a korban chatos, that the blood was received into 4 vessels, v'nosen daled matanus mikos echad, and yet all 4 applications of blood only came from one of the 4 vessels, the 3 other vessels were not used? Shekula nishbachin yisod, and says the blood of Reb Shimon, nonetheless, all of the 4 vessels will be spilled on the yisod amizbech. Talmud Omer, the pasuk says, "Ves kol dama yishboch," that all of the blood will be poured on the yisod amizbech, even from the vessels that were not used. V'aksiv ves damo yishboch. What do you do with the pasuk of ves damo yishboch? Not all of the blood, some of the blood. Omar Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi ulam ute Sheerayim shebetzaver behema. Says Rav Ashi, that is coming to exclude leftover blood in the tzaver abehema. That refers to any blood that would be left in the neck of the animal, right? So meaning you have this korban chatos and you did Kabbalah Saddam, you received all the blood in the vessels, and you did the 4 matanos and everything like that, and you spilled everything on the yisod of mizbech, and now there's still some blood left in the neck of the animal. That blood will not be poured in the yisod of mizbech. That will just be spilled down the drain into the channel that flows through the azar. Continues the Mishnah, Kibel akosher v'noson leposel v'chulei. The Mishnah had said that if a kosher kohen does Kabbalah Saddam, but then he gives the blood to somebody who's posel. So he says in the Mishnah that the posel person, so what happens? The posel person just gives it back to the kosher person, right? So a kosher person, the Kabbalah Saddam, gave it to a posel person. So we say, wait, posel guy, give it back to the kosher guy. We also said that if it was received properly in the right hand, but then it was put in the left hand, just put it back in the right hand. We said that if it was received in a kli sharis, but then transferred to a kli chol, okay, just put it back in the kli sharis. So says the Gemara utzricha, we need all 3 of these scenarios. Diash midan posel, because if we'd only have the first scenario of a kosher person giving the blood to a posel person, we say give it back to the kosher person. Have amina my posel tamei d'chazil avodas tzibur. I might have thought, who's the posel person that we're talking about? A kohen who's tamei. That a kohen who's tamei, okay, it's posel for a korban yachid, but by a korban tzibur, he would be allowed to do the avodah. So therefore, maybe that's why we say, okay, in that case, just simply give it back to the kosher guy, because the tamei person is not all, objectively unfit for all scenarios. After all, he can do avodah for a korban tzibur. Avo small, low, but I might think that if the blood was passed from the right hand to the left hand, maybe that would be a showstopper. So therefore we have to say, no, just put it back in the right hand and it's fine. V'ashminan small, and if we only had the scenario of the left hand, the islay echshera b'yom kippurim. Well, also the left hand is also not always osir. For example, the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur, he'll have the shovel in his right hand and he'll have the spoon in his left hand. Right? It says Rashi, notas amachto b'yamino v'sakaf b'smolo. He'd have the shovel in his right hand, the spoon in his left hand. So on Yom Kippur, the left hand is actually used as part of the avodah. Aval klichot lo, but I might think an unholy vessel, maybe that is problematic. That's a showstopper. V'yashmin and klichon, if it says the unholy vessel, b'shum dechazu l'kadoshinu, yeah, but an unholy vessel you can always make holy. Aval hanach emalo, but not, for example, a left hand. There's always going to be a left hand. So tzricha. So we say, and therefore we needed all of the 3 scenarios to say that in all 3 scenarios, Pashit, just make it good again. If it was in the right hand, give it to the left hand, just put it back in the right hand, etc. Why don't we say dichui? What do we mean? Well, you had, let's say, you did Kabbalah Saddam in a kli sharis, for example, and then you transferred the dam to a kli chol. Why don't we say that once the blood was transferred to a kli chol, it became invalid? You can't fix it. It's dichui. At that point, it was problematic. And that's it. It remains problematic. Excuse me 1 second, I have a visitor. Ravashi says Ravina to Ravashi Achramar B'Yirmiyami Difti Mishmei Derave Hamani Chanon HaMitzriu Deleisle Dichuyin. Well, our Mishnah is the view of Chanon HaMitzri. That Chanon HaMitzri doesn't hold of dichui. So therefore, when the blood is, let's say, received in a kli sharis and transferred to a kli chol, it's not going to make it dichui. The sign that we learn in the Brisa, Chodin Mitzri, Omer says Chodin Mitzri, Av Dam Bikos, maybe Chavero Umizaveg Lo. That says Chodin Mitzri when it comes to Yom Kippur. When it comes to Yom Kippur with the Sa'ir La Hashem and Sa'ir La Azazel. That of course you have these two goats, you take a lottery, one of them gets chucked off a cliff, one of them gets slaughtered for our sins. So if the Kohen Gadol slaughtered already the Sa'ir La Hashem, and the blood is in a klisharis, and then the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach dies. So what do you do? Again, the Sanhedrin Chanana Mitzri Omer says Chanana Mitzri. Afilu dam bikos. So even though the Sar Hashem was already slaughtered and the blood was in the klisharis, and all of a sudden it turns out you don't have a Sar Azazel anymore. The Sar Mishtaleach, it's gone. So I would think that the blood from the Sar Hashem becomes invalid. It becomes dichui. You no longer have a Sar Mishtaleach. The Sar Hashem should become invalid. But no, says Chanana Mitzri, maybe Chaveru Mizavig Lo. No, just get a replacement for the Sar Mishtaleach, and there you go. Problem solved. Find a replacement for the Sar Mishtaleach. The blood is completely fine. It's no issue that there was a point in time where there was no Sar Mishtaleach. That's fine. So we see that Chanana Mitzri doesn't hold of dichui. It doesn't say that, wait, there was a period in time when it was invalid because there was no accompanying Sar Mishtaleach. He doesn't say that. No dichui. And here as well, when the blood was transferred from the klisharis to the klichol, it's not going to be an issue. Rav Ashi says you can even hold of dichui. However, kol shebiyado lo avedachui. That whenever the solution is in your hands, it's not dichui. Meaning, in this case, the klisharis the blood was received in a klisharis, gevaldik. It was transferred to a klichol. Quickly put it right back into the klisharis. Kilu, the solution is up to you. Just transfer it back to the klisharis. Problem solved. So even if you say, by let's say the Sar Mishtaleach and Sar Hashem dichui, that's because you're going to have to get a new sheep, and it's dependent on there being another sheep, etc. Right? There are other factors here. It's entirely up to you. Just put it back in the klisharis and all good. So therefore, Rav Ashi suggests that you can say in our Mishnah, even if you do hold of dichui, you can say that there's no dichui here, because it's just completely up to you to just put it right back into the klisharis. Rav Shia, Kavasu Davash Mistava says of Shia, that Taka makes sense, like Rav Ashi, that if you can be in charge of the solution, then there's no dichui. Man Shamas lay dichui, because after all, whose opinion is it who holds of dichui? Rabbi Yehuda. Ditnan. That's learned in a Mishnah. Ve'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, Nishbach Adam Yamus HaMishtalech, because when it comes to Yom Kippur, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that if you have the Sar Hashem and Sar HaMishtalech, so if the blood of the Sar Hashem spills on the floor, Yamus HaMishtalech. Well, if the Sar Hashem, the blood spills on the floor, so you gotta kill the Sar HaMishtalech. Meis HaMishtalech, if the Sar HaMishtalech dies, Yishpoch Adam, you have to spill out the blood that was already received from the Sar Hashem. So we see that he does hold of dichui, right? He holds that if the Sar Mishtaleach dies, that's it. The blood, right, the Sar Hashem is no good. You're gonna have to find a replacement for both the Sar Mishtaleach and the Sar Hashem. So Rabbi Yehuda holds of dichui, and yet Bishaminan lay, and we also hear that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that if the solution is within reach, is up to him, within his hands, well, then we wouldn't say dichui. The sign of the Rabbi Yehuda says Kos echorei memali midama tayroves, that this is talking about the Korban Pesach. That by the Korban Pesach, what they would do is it would be a big bloody mess, right? We're going to see in a few minutes that by the Kohen, we saw already in Masechta Pesachim that when they would offer the Korban Pesach, there was so much sheep and goat blood in the Azara that it would be like up to the Kohanim's knees. And then the Kohen would take a cupful of this blood, which was mixed, which was basically a mix of all the blood in the Azara. V'zarko zerikah achas keneged hayesod, and he would throw it on the mizbeach. Meaning, because what the concern was, what if you had somebody who slaughtered his korban pesach and it all went on the floor, and now he can't, right? And the blood fell on the floor, so he couldn't do zerikah sadam. So what do? Is the korban possible? We say no. What they would do is they would take a cup there was so much blood in the Azari, they would just take a cup and stick it into all this blood, and the assumption was that it included in this cup was basically the blood of all the korbanos that had been slaughtered and that their blood is on the floor. And then you take this cup and you throw it on the mizbeach, and it's keilu, it's going to count for anybody whose blood may have spilled on the floor. So we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can have a situation where like, oh no, the blood spilled on the floor, don't worry about it. You can always, if you can fix it, so then fix it. We see that even in a situation of dichui, of when like, oh no, Houston, we have a problem, if the solution is within reach, so then you can just solve it and we won't say dichui. Gufa, we said, Tani Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda kos echorei memale midam hataroves, that he would fill up a cup from all this blood that was in the Azar, shem yishofech echod mehem, that if somebody's korban pesach blood spilled on the floor, nimsa shu machshiro, well, no, not a problem. You're going to take this blood and it's basically like, it's like kol anarim. We just had Simchas Torah. It's like kol anarim, all the children get an aliyah tzazamen, and it'll count for all of the children. So you're also, you take this one cup of blood that has all, includes in it all, a drop of blood from all, so to speak, a drop of blood from all of the korbanos, and you'll do zerikah sadam for all of the korbanos whose blood may have spilled on the floor. But they said to Rabbi Yehuda, how can you do this? But as we know, as we learned in a Mishnah a few days ago, in the previous parak, that if you slice the neck of an animal and the blood squirts directly onto the floor, you can't fix that. If it goes into a kli and then spills on the floor, was that in our last Mishnah, or is it in the next Mishnah? I can't remember. No, it was in the last Mishnah. We learned it on Daf Lamed Beis. Nishbach min hakli ala ritzba basofo kosher, right? So if the Kabbalah Saddam was already done in the vessel and then it spills on the floor, so then you could salvage it. But if it's squirted directly on the floor, you can't salvage it. So it wasn't received in a kli sharis. Mino yade, to which he responds, how do you know that it wasn't received in a kli? Okay, fine. Maybe we don't know for sure, but we do have to be concerned that maybe it wasn't received in a kli sharis. Rabbi Yehuda responds, Afani lo amarti el kishin iskabu b'kli. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, I'm also only talking about that the blood was received in a kli sharis. V'gufa min hayadeh. Okay, but how do you know this? How do you know that all these people's blood that spilled on the floor was received in a kli sharis? Kohanim zrizin hen. I'm going to add some extra words here that the Kohanim from the Shita Mekubetzes, that the Kohanim are very zrizin. They're very zealous, meticulous. They're on the ball, and therefore they're going to make sure that they're always going to do Kabbalah Saddam in a kli sharis. It's not going to squirt directly on the floor. Ishtapuchi nami lo mishtapich. Yeah, but if that's the case, if they're so meticulous, well then nothing should be spilling on the floor. Agav, there's reason. Avdin hair, yeah, but because they're so zariz, they're so on the ball and excited and moving and doing and thising and thating, they move very quickly, and things can fall. So meaning, you can assume that the Kohanim are not just going to let the blood just squirt directly on the floor. They're going to use the klisharis, but because they're always moving and they're fast and they're this and that, they're on the ball, they're doing all the steps, but because there's so much going on, there is a chance that the blood could spill on the floor. And therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, not a problem. We're going to take a cup of blood from all the blood in the Azara, we're going to throw that on the Mizbeach, and then any blood that was received in a klisharis and they may have spilled on the floor will have zerikah sadam that way. Okay, but there's tons of freaking blood in the Azara. A lot of that blood is going to be not the dama nefesh, right? Not the blood that we're going to want to throw on the mizbeach. Lots of that blood that's going up to the kohanim's knees is going to be, leftover blood from residual blood from the neck, which is not kosher for throwing on the mizbeach. Rabbi Yehuda the tamei, what Rabbi Yehuda is according to his reasoning, to Omar dama tamtzis kari dam. Yeah, but Rabbi Yehuda says that dama tamtzis is also called blood. The sign of the Berliner Bride said dama tamtzis be'azhara. That there's a mitzvah lo saseh, I think, against eating dama tamtzis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer bekaris. Rabbi Yehuda says it's not just mitzvah lo saseh, it's actually chiyuv karis for eating dama tamtzis. So we see that he considers it to be blood. V'amar belazar moder Rabbi Yehuda leinin kapar shenem chaper. Yeah, but still Rabbi Yehuda admits that even though it might be blood, you can't get kapara. You can't do zerikah sadam with dama tamtzis. Shenemar ki adamu b'nefesh yichaper dam she'nefesh yotzabo kari dam she'nefesh yotzabo ein kari dam. That you can only get kapara with dama nefesh, the squirting blood, the blood that the animal dies from losing it, not the residual blood. Rabbi Yehuda the time dam ein dam mevatel dam. Yeah, but Rabbi Yehuda is consistent with his reasoning that he says that blood can't be mevatel other blood, right? So therefore, yes, there might be a lot of dama tamtzis there, but there's also going to be dama nefesh there from the blood that's spilled out, and therefore you could just fill a cup with it and do zerikah sadam that way. Omer loy Rabbi Yehuda says to them, the divrei according to you, lama pokakin azara. Well, according to you, that nobody's taking a cupful and doing zerikah sadam to account for the people whose blood spilled on the floor. Well, then what's the point of corking up the azara in order to prevent the blood to leave? According to me, we cork up the azara to prevent the blood from leaving, so we can then take a cupful and save the people whose blood spilled on the floor. Why are you plugging up the azara? Just let it stream out to Nachal Kidron by the way of the Amma. They said to him, Shvach hu livnei aharon sheyalchu ad arkubeim badam. Well, because we do it tamei is part of the experience, Keilu. Erev Pesach, all of Am Yisrael is coming with the korban Pesach, Mamis, and it's happening, and there's Kohanim, and there's people, and there's slaughtering, and there's goats, and there's blood, so much blood that it goes up to the Kohanim's knees. It's mamish, like it's a memorable sight. So it's part of the experience, Keilu. Shvachu livnei Aaron, it's the shavach, it's the praise of the Aaron, that you should walk ad arkubeim badam until their knees in blood. V'adam ave chatzitza. Wait, but wouldn't the blood be a chatzitza? We learned that you can't have anything between the feet of the kohanim and the floor. Feet on the floor. Wouldn't the blood that's going up to their knees be a chatzitza? Lachu v'lo ave. Wait, v'adam ave chatzitza. Lachu v'lo ave chatzitza. No, because the blood is moist, it's liquid, and therefore it won't be a chatzitza. Desanya hadam ve'adio ve'advash ve'cholov. Blood, ink, honey, milk, yeveshin chotzitzin. When they are dry, they would make a chatzitza lachem, but if they're moist, ein chotzitzin, they don't make a chatzitza. V'akam mistave monayu, but their clothing is going to get dirty. Vitanya, we learned the other day in a brayso, if a kohen does avoda with dirty clothing, begadim, the avoda is psula, so their clothing are going to get dirty. And if you're going to say, well, let them shorten their pants, Vitanya mido kimidaso shelo yachsor shelo yosir. But we said that you can't. It has to be a proper size. We learned about that as well. It can't be too long. It can't be too short. Well, yeah, but it'll be okay for bringing the limbs to the ramp of the mizbeach. That isn't technically an avoda. Vilo, it's not an avoda. Vatani vikriv akoin es akol zolach zvarim lakevish. That when the pasuk says vikriv akoin es akol, that the kohen is going to bring everything to the mizbeach, that's bringing the the Evarim to the Kevish. Rather, what they could do is, with the lifted up pants, they can bring the wood to the Mizbeach, that's not considered avoda. Okay, but still, how do they actually do the avoda though? It's debate. There were platforms there in the Azar, and they would be able to like jump from platform to platform and avoid making their clothing dirty. Chevre, that was Daf Lamed Daled of Masechta Zevachim. I think it was a big daf. I haven't looked at how long it was. It was probably pretty big, I imagine. Anyways, so that was Daf Lamed Daled of Masechta Zevachim. The daf began talking about a tamei person eats tahor kodesh. You have a tamei person who eats kodesh, and the big question was what happens lifnei zerikah. Rish Lakish says makis even before zerikah. Lifnei zerikah there would be makis. Rabbi Yochanan says, wait, I have a typo there. Rabbi Yochanan says makis only after zerikas ha-dam. Only after zerikas ha-dam would there be makis. A tahor person eats tamei kodesh before zerikas hadam. Abai says everyone agrees yes, makis in that case, because after all, you even be chayiv for eating wood and frankincense, certainly meat before zerikah. Rava says everyone agrees no, makis. Burning non-prescribed animals on the altar. So if we're talking about tamei animals like horses and camels, everyone agrees it will be a violation of a mitzvah's essay. If we're talking about a chaya, Rabbi Yochanan says it's a violation of mitzvah's essay. Rish Lakish says garnished, but we ended up proving him wrong. And then we got into that whole big discussion of Sheerayim and dichui. If you have a apostle person who does Kabbalah Sadam and Zrika Sadam, do you spill the rest of the blood on the Yisod Mizbeach, or can you actually still do Kabbalah Sadam with the kosher person and salvage the korban? What if it was received in a cup, and then the cup was taken outside of the Azara and brought back into the Azara and done Kabbalah Hadam? What if you have a korban chatas and it was received the Kabbalah Sadam in two different cups, but all the matonos alaber kronos was done from one of the cups? What becomes of the other cup? Is it dichui? Is it Sheerayim? We said it's machlokas between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the Chacham. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says that it's Sheerayim, you could spill on the Mizbeach. Tanna Kama says that it's dichui, and you would not spill on the Mizbeach. What else did we get into over there? We got into, that if you receive the blood and let's say a klisharis, but then transfer it to a klichol, and then you bring it back, but shouldn't it be dichui? So we had two answers. One answer was that, well, this is Chonon HaMitzri, who doesn't hold of dichui. Alternatively, you could say that if you do hold of dichui, but if you hold of dichui, you could still, if it's within your hands to fix it, you can fix it. And then we got into the whole thing with the Korban Pesach, that they would take a cup of all the blood to atone for the people whose Korban Pesach's blood spilled out on the floor. Anyways, Cheveh, that was Daf Lamed Daled of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.